Technicolor Postworks New York, and he's going to introduce our panelists. So thanks, Joe.
Thanks. So Technicolor Postworks is obviously it's a merger, because we never would have invented that name if it wasn't sort of our origin story. We're a facility. Obviously, we were based on originally on a lab. We also have an editorial company, which is more the Postwork side of the family, and that those two things are now represented in one company. We are a little bit unique in the New York market in that we really completely specialize in long-form filmmaking. And Ben Murray and I are longtime feature documentary people, and that's kind of our passion. And it's one of the things that we've concentrated on personally in our careers, and have been able to do both at Postworks and at the Technicolor Postworks part of the thing. Dan is a client of ours who we originally met as part of a team working on films with Eugene Jarecki, and then he has made his own film, and we were able to work with Dan on his film as well, and that's why we asked him to come and kind of talk about what that feels like, kind of both sides now kind of a thing. And we're trying to be as open and as candid about this as we can be, because I think there's kind of the feeling that you go into a facility and it's kind of like going into a big hospital. And you have to kind of have to trust the doctors, but they're also trying to take every dollar that you've got in your pocket, and you want to make sure that all your stuff is locked up and things like that. And that perception, I think, is based on sad reality a lot of the time. And we want to make sure that you are as informed as you can be, sincerely. The worst kind of money that we ever make as a facility is we're making from somebody because something's broken that we didn't anticipate. And so we'd like to be as forward-thinking and as proactive as we possibly can, and engaging with you as early in the process as we possibly can. I think you'll hear that again and again from us as we talk about what we're doing. I'm the technical guy, and I run the kind of engineering side of what we do, and we could talk about that too. But I think more than anything, we were talking about process. Ben represents our creative group, and the kinds of things that we do in post that are contribute to the actual film. I'm the guy who deals with the QC side of things, which is not the fun part, but is important and gets you paid. So we're open to any kind of questions. We've done this, I think, for 4 or 5 years now in a row. We'd love to hear what you guys are worried about, what your thoughts are, and how Dan's and Ben's and my experience might help you, and the stuff you've got now. And I'll shut up.
So Ben and Joe are amazing, and they invited me to come here, I think, because, like Joe was saying, I kind of have an experience starting from the bottom, if you will. I was the director, but also producer and editor of my film, Get Me Roger Stone. But I started kind of as an assistant editor and an associate producer. And I've been through post with these guys a bunch of times, going back, I think, 8 years or so, or even a little more. So I'm kind of a unique filmmaker, I think, in a way that I have this technical knowledge as an editor that was very helpful to them. So hopefully I could, provide some insight, having a bit more of a deeper knowledge of the whole post situation, and maybe what I can advise you do and not do.
I guess, well, anyway, it's great to be here, and it's great to have an opportunity to talk to you guys outside of the facility. I think, hopefully, as a group, we can really get to some questions and without the pressure. Right now we're not worried about the next 4 hours and what's that gonna cost and the deadline's tomorrow. Like, for the filmmakers in here, you've made it, congrats. I'm sure it's exciting finally, if you haven't seen it before, if this is your premiere, to see it, with an audience. There's a saying with festival screenings and the festival circuit that Murphy's Law is the rule. So that's where we come in, and we're really here to try to help filmmakers through the process and get them ready. So, when you see your film on the big screen with an audience and there's no hitting pause, that you know what you're getting into, that we've made it look as good as it can, and that we've prepared you for what could happen. And part of that is on the technical side, on the filmmaker side, it's all about preparation. That's something we bring to you know, the post, like who are your collaborators? We're here to collaborate with you for finishing. And it's something we deal with every day. It's kind of like finals week for us all the time, year round. So we're a little twisted that we love to do that. You know, it's a good adrenaline, but for you guys, you know, it's a big deal. And so we hold that pretty sacred. And I mean, for me, that's pretty much the intro, I'd say, for what we're up to. I'm excited to hear what questions you guys have.
It's something I say every year, so forgive me if you're a fan and you've come 5 years in a row and you've heard the same exact thing the last 5 years. But the quantum physicist Niels Bohr said that an expert is somebody who's made every conceivable mistake in a very narrow field. So that is one of the things that we offer. And that's not just us. There's a lot of very good post-production companies. There are a lot of very good individuals who do post out of, in their bathrobe in their basement, and some amazing stuff comes out of people like that. We're in a really rich time when a lot of the technology that used to be very formidable in finishing films is now available to people in relatively modest circumstances. But there still is a lot that's technically complicated about it, or can be. And particularly if you don't plan to plan carefully from the beginning. And in the context of documentary, that's almost an oxymoron, because the documentary is, by its very nature, it's not completely planned. So one of the most common scenario that we run into is people say, I've been making this film for the last 11 years, and the technology has evolved a lot since I started to shoot this when I was still in college. And I've been accumulating this stuff, or this is about a personal subject. We did Nyc Pro's film Strong Island, and that's a film that evolved over a long period of time. Nyc's own personal story is reflected in that film, and there's a lot there, and it was not something that Nyc was conceiving ahead of time in many ways, because it was such a family story. Dan's film evolved as the news evolved, and you had an opportunity to do something that turned into something very different. Can you tell us kind of about how that arc?
Yeah. So, well, actually, don't we have the trailer? Maybe we should play the trailer in case you're unfamiliar with the film. So, a little background on the film. As you can see, it has to do with Trump, but in the trailer they also mentioned, he created the sleazeball lobbyist, he pioneered negative campaigning. I originally started making this film in 2011 because I saw Roger Stone as this vehicle to kind of tell a larger story about our politics, and specifically Republican politics. At that time, he would always go on and on like, well, we're gonna get Trump to run for president, Trump's gonna be a great president, and we thought it was like the craziest thing in the world. And never really gave much thought to it until 2015 rolled around, and all of a sudden, Trump entered the race, shot to the top of the Republican polls, and then we were sort of making another movie. But in starting it so long ago, get a little technical here for a second, there's a lot of mixing of camera formats of like, I borrowed this camera from a friend one time, I have a 5D, and there's even some 720p footage in there, it was like a hodgepodge of all different cameras. So luckily with my experience as an assistant editor, although it's very long ago, I knew how to correctly set up my Avid project to link back to the original files because it was an offline project. So I had the knowledge to do that, but a lot of people, especially if they're making a film over, in this case it was 5.5 years with all these different formats, they may not know exactly how to perfectly set up their project, whatever the editing system may be. And that's where I think people could benefit from reaching out to a place like Postworks, because even if you don't have an immense budget, they're always going to work with you because they're looking for potential clients down the road, right? So they will give you the advice to kind of set up your project in the right way, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, they'd rather give you a little advice on the front end than have to deal with a bunch of insanity on the back end that's gonna cost you money and cost them time and give them headaches. So yeah, I would just advise any filmmakers, if you're unsure of kind of the technical side of it, to reach out to Joe and Ben, or any post house. I'm sure they're gonna be happy to give you some free advice in exchange for you possibly becoming a client of theirs when you're going into post. I'll add to that besides my #1 post-production secret being hire Joe and Ben, is you wanna create a team for your film that knows what they're doing. You don't want to get caught with your pants down, say when you're you're getting ready for post, with like an AE who is in over their head and doesn't know how to prepare for post, or post super who isn't up to speed. You want to plan in advance to get all your archival in and get all your cameras matching back. They'll always do tests with you of like small portions of your film to make sure everything's going to go smoothly once you actually get on the clock with them.
Yeah, it's a universal offer, and anybody in this room can take it. And I would imagine that almost any one of our esteemed rivals would offer you the same thing. Is that if you have a project and you have a kind of a sense of roughly when you're going to be finishing, go and meet with people and bring samples of what you're doing, and have your project. And it doesn't matter what it's in. It could be an iMovie, and however you're making it, it's all legitimate. We know that a lot of documentarians are cutting their own films, and that's something that we expect, and there's no shame at all in the hodgepodge of different things that we're seeing, because we see that from Michael Moore and everybody else that we work with, that just because of the way that these things kind of happen, usually both because it happens over a long period of time, and also because the nature of documentary is this is not something that is well funded necessarily from the beginning, or is necessarily regimented and organized in the way that like a large feature film would be, or a TV show would be. Ben, you've been doing this for a long time, and we've been doing this for a long time. Do you have anything that you would want people to know? What is the first thing that you think? You're also a filmmaker. What is the first thing that you conceive is? What's your first priority in terms of wanting to know something about a project when you get it in the door?
Yeah, I think when we're lucky that when you do a camera test and you're choosing, hey, what camera am I going to shoot with? If we're, from our post-production angle, able to be involved in that, it's really, to me, that makes it a great process, because it's not just which camera aesthetically, but it's also what file format aesthetically, and also what file format do you have the drives for? Because with the flip of a switch, you might be shooting some like raw 4K that's going to take up tons of drive space, and you might not have the drives for that, versus a ProRes. And being able to not just look at what a lens package will do, but also, hey, if I'm trading off drive space for this lighter weight file, what does that mean? Like, is that going to hurt me, help me? And what we do is we're able to bend the image with color, because a lot of these formats, you can shoot with it and it's going to look the same, but where it counts is when you start trying to adjust the image and the color, and that's when different formats will break apart in different ways. And so it's just a way that you can start, even before you go into a live production setting, you can have a concept of, hey, what can I get away with? Here's my trade-offs that I've deliberately made, and I've worked with people who have, we've dealt with these files a lot, so we can tell you, like, go cheap here and here's why, or go expensive here and here's why. And there's always trade-offs, but it's good to be informed. And we love post, and we're here, really it's about, you're out there imagining what you want something to be. We're at the end where that imagination is becoming what it will be, and we really want you to not have any surprises. And the sooner we're involved, the sooner that we as a team can figure out, hey, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. And at the end of the day, it's about you guys shaping your story, but we like to minimize the distraction and the disappointment, and that comes from just being upfront from the beginning and thinking about how will this finish. And I think that can be pretty overwhelming, especially if it's your first film, to be thinking, hey, like, where will this be one day? Especially for first timers, I see this a lot where YouTube or laptop seems like that's good enough. But I hope, you know, coming to us, and at least like looking out there, how it looks not just on the laptop but on a big screen, there's a pretty dramatic difference, and it's just something, the more you can prepare, the better off you'll be.
Dan, when was the first time that you saw your footage projected? Was that after we had started really in the process, or were we able to get you in early?
I believe I came in a couple weeks before, just to get a sense of things and you know, create some looks. So Allie, our amazing colorist who's here, could, you know, start working on her own, and you know, so I came in and we went through with my co-directors and our executive producer, and we just kind of looked at every setup for the sit-down interviews specifically, and what they were going to look like. So Allie could work autonomously for a little bit and get a lot more done when she doesn't have people over her shoulder. So we set the looks, and you know, that was, you know, right before we were starting the color. But that was the first time we saw it projected.
That's a standing offer too, is that if provided we have time, it's never a money thing, but if we can squeeze you into the schedule, and sometimes that means coming in at 7 o'clock in the morning, but if you can and you want to just look at an assembly of where you are and just look at it, just to string out and take a look and see how it feels on the big screen, you might get a sense of what's working or what isn't working, particularly about file footage or archival footage that you're considering. Also, it's really good to us to bring the stuff that you know is problematic. You were chasing somebody down the street, and you know that the footage is very shaky. You want to see what we could do, and we're always willing to take on things like that and test stuff. And that's literally a blanket offer. If you've got something that you're not sure if it's going to work or not, please bring it to us, and we'll have somebody work with you and sit down and say, yeah, this is usable, or it's usable, but it's going to take 3 weeks to fix it, or something like that. And you know, often in documentary you can't reshoot, so we are quite often in a position. Some of the late nights that Ben alluded to have to do with just making that. You know, I worked on Fire 9/11, and it was we had footage of Bin Laden. That it was the degradation of it was distracting enough that Michael felt that we really needed to really massage the footage. We worked on it for weeks. One 15-second clip we worked on for weeks to try to get that to read and to feel, you know, real, and not distracting from the rest of the show. And that's not something we can always do. And obviously, I think in this case, because you're I don't know how, I know you went back pretty far back with the Roger stuff, but was there things that we had to rescue from like 1 inch and things like that? I didn't even know if we got to that.
No, there wasn't. I mean, I'm pretty sure every bit of our archival and stuff was, you know, transferred before we got it to you guys. But did make me think what you were saying of. I worked on this film by the filmmaker Eugene Jarecki that just premiered this year at the Cannes Festival, which you guys worked on, and we started it a few years ago with some ideas to do some very ambitious cinematography, to shoot it anamorphically, which the Panasonic GH4 can shoot in an anamorphic mode if you put on anamorphic lenses, you know, essentially making it like super widescreen. And we did, I think, 1 shoot, and it wasn't looking basically how we expected it, even after some tests. And I'm like, we got to bring this to Ben and Joe, like they'll know. And we did a couple of tests, you know, like we put it up on the big screen and we put some color on it, and just realized that, you know, the codec we were shooting in just was not up to snuff, and it started to artifact and break down in the black areas and stuff. And I think ultimately talking it through, you know, we figured out we needed an external recorder to record the footage at a higher bit rate, but that was all through, you know, conversations we had with them just starting the project, and, you know, wasn't finished till, I think, like 2.5 years later.
Obviously, we're in a time when you can do amazing things with your cell phone. Is an amazing camera, and the camera in your cell phone, if it's a relatively recent vintage, is better than any HD cam in the world when I started to work in HD, and actually long into that process, probably better than any camera that existed 5 years ago, to tell you the truth. And the you know, better is you know, lots of indicia better, but for some things it's amazing. But it breaks down sometimes when you get to the big screen. And that's one way in which you can kind of put a really powerful lens on it and see the issues. And I think that was one of the things that we found with Eugene. And the other thing that happens is it also has to do with the context. So you don't have, enlarging it is one thing, but also we have the opposite problem where you're shooting for something, you feel like it's really, really working great on this big, you know, OLED TV that you've got that you're cutting with. And then you start to distribute your correction, you know, your corrected film, and people are watching it on their iPhone, and it doesn't look right. And that's another flip side of things, is that, you know, we hold ourselves to this standard, and that we have to do that for big feature films, but we also hold ourselves to the standard that the way that, especially nonfiction filmmaking, is received by the audience is everywhere. And we try to have, we have kind of a panoply of different formats that we deliver in. We try to test everything. So that's another thing that we might urge you to do early, is to take a look at your film, project it if you can. That's really great, and on a big screen. Bigger screens are better, although they're not necessarily technically better. They do expose things, and that's important because people watch it in real TVs. They don't watch it in a reference environment like we have. And then also on the small screen, and, you know, particularly because a lot of the stuff that we're all looking at is looked at like that. So you have to prepare for the whole ecosystem that you're working in, and you have to, and it's also helpful to have people, we have an easier time because we see a lot of stuff, but, you know, so it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, you know, the way that iTunes is asking for HDR now is evolving, and we have to, you know, we think that it's actually not what it originally was, it's something else. Netflix, the big over the top people are kind of, they're bringing kind of a computational mentality to the, sorry, I'm talking about my shit, but they have a slightly different view of things than traditional broadcasters do, and that's changed the landscape, and in many ways, great opportunities for nonfiction film, but they also have very stringent criteria that they hold you to, and we have to advise you sensibly how to approach those standards as closely as you can without going crazy, spending a lot of money.
I wanted to add, I mean, almost every documentary we work on has archival footage, and I think something talking about 1 inch, transferring from 1 inch or whatever it is, and what Dan was speaking to with making sure you try to assemble a good team, a good assistant, a good post supervisor. I think getting an archival researcher is also important. You might be ripping a link off of YouTube and it looks okay small, but then you see it large, it might not look so great, and you can start thinking about how to source it. And I was curious, I think, Dan, like, how was that for you in that process?
Right, so I prepared another clip for this anecdote I'm gonna tell. We have another clip. So obviously that's, although it's a historical little poignant right now with Paul Manafort and everything. But the reason I showed that is because when we were talking about this and, you know, what can we speak about, and Ben brought up the idea of fair use and archival, and I did wanted to kind of show that and speak to this one clip, which is this 60 Minutes report you see in there where they're like, Black Manafort and Stone got $3 million, whatever it is. So for me, that was like a crucial clip, and we had gotten the screener from CBS, who owns 60 Minutes. And, you know, I cut it into the timeline. It was part of the film for quite a while. Then we get to licensing time, and CBS, or rather 60 Minutes, denied licensing us that clip. And I'm like, shit, what are we gonna do? And luckily, we had a really amazing archival producer who is also an archival researcher, just hunted it down. And it was this kind of crazy goose chase that luckily we planned to start getting the archival in well in advance, because you have to know that things are gonna pop up that you could have never expected. So I'm like, Jeff Dye, who's the archival producer, I'm like, we got to find this, how can we find it? And it's one thing if it's something from a few years ago, it might be on YouTube. If it's some random, obscure 60 Minutes report from 1987, it might be a little harder. So Jeff was able to find one copy of it through searching through worldcat.org, which kind of catalogs libraries around America. He found that, oh, there's a special collection in the University of Georgia that has this on VHS. And I'm like, we gotta get it. Okay, so he calls up and they're like, well, you could only access the library if you're a student or a faculty. It's like, okay, so then he starts calling around, like, do we know anyone in Atlanta that could get themselves into this library and take out this tape for us? And we thought we found someone, and then found out that the special collection is, you're only able to view it in the library. And we're like, okay, so another hurdle. So, and the other thing was that only faculty could view it. And it's like, so there was all these hurdles, and basically Jeff is so good, he harassed them so much that after a month, they're like, fine, we'll make a copy of it for you. And they sent us the VHS copy. And, you know, it was like a very happy day in my office that day. And then we get it, and it has this big giant watermark in the corner. And we're like, okay, so I'm like, oh. And then a light bulb went off in my head. Oh, we still have the screener from CBS, and although it's watermarked, its watermark is right in the center, and the time code's at the bottom, and their watermark is in the lower right. So when we brought it to Ben and his team during the online, they basically laid both on top of each other and were able to just take the corner of the screener, and although it was lower quality, they just matted out that corner and the bug was gone. So that one clip, it was a lot of work to get that one clip, but sometimes as a filmmaker, it's just something so crucial, you know, you can't let it go and you gotta make it happen. And we were very lucky. That was probably the hardest piece of archive we had to hunt down, and then ultimately fair use.
So that it was fair use that you used it as?
We fair used it, yes.
So in the 5 years we've been doing this, we've never actually said a post-production secret. That would be one of the ones that I think I would treat as an actual secret.
Don't tell the University of Georgia.
Where Dan is currently on the faculty. So stuff like that comes up, and it's nice to have the tools and the people that know how to do stuff like that. And Ali, Ali Ames, who's the colorist, is also a visual effects artist. So there was, I don't know if Ali did it, but there was, that's something that's nice that you were able to do that. It's surprising actually. Feature-length documentary is actually the hardest work that we do, technically. Visual effects heavy feature films are relatively easy. TV shows, even with multiple twin characters and things, and the kinds of stuff that you run into, high production value shows, relatively, I'm not saying it's easy from the amount of work, but it's easy from a conceptual and technical point of view. Most things are fairly tractable. And with most of it we've seen before, but the stuff that we get in for documentary is actually sometimes the craziest and hardest to do, and it's good to have people who are used to doing lots of different kinds of stuff to be able to pull those things off.
Right, yeah, it just goes back to the idea of it, especially if you receive funding for your film, just want to make sure you hire really awesome people who know what they're doing. You want a good producer, you want a good post super, you want good AEs, and you want good archival producer. You want your team to be amazing, and maybe you want to hire some of your friends, or who are a little less experienced. I think that's great too, but you have to kind of supplement them, especially once you're getting towards post. with the people who are going to be able to just have that knowledge of how to put out fires when they ignite.
I'm sensing that some of you might have some questions, and there's even somebody with their hand up. So, do you guys feel like this is a good time to turn it over? I'm sorry, this down here in the front. I'm sorry, not
Me?
you.
Okay. Just wondering, what are the top pitfalls filmmakers can avoid when they bring their project to you? What should they have done? The top 5 things that you wish that filmmakers knew, before they brought their project to you.
Is it only 5?
All right, 10.
As
20.
many as you want.
I think, at least from my point of view, it's one, and then everything will be downstream of that, and that's organization. So it's all about if you come to us with 20 terabytes across 10 drives, and it's time to conform, and we need to get it done because it's screening here in 3 days, that's like a nightmare. So organization, and that comes down to even how the timeline's organized. Like the files that you use, if they're in one folder, and it's just those files, that helps. The more organization, the more time savings, the more that we can do all of those little unexpected cool things that you might not know about, but we'll bring to the table. Maybe like in the one photograph, there was this element that's always annoyed you. Like, oh, we have the time now to remove it because we're not worried about finding the 3 files that we can't find out of the thousands.
The saddest thing for us is when we don't have the time to help you do something that you really want to do to make the film better. And that's something that's very hard, and it also means sometimes we stay up until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning doing that, but it's also, if you're already staying up until 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning doing just the bare minimum to get it out the door, then you don't get to do stuff like that. So yeah, that would be the absolute number one. The second one, from my point of view, and I'm a visual person, and that's more what I do, but the other thing I would say, to be fair, is the sound. Your story, if you had to pick one, I would say pick the sound over the picture. And I say that, we do both, but over the years, I've been doing this for a long time, and that is absolutely, I don't think that will ever change. The way that, especially when you're telling the truth, when you tell the truth, what you say is more important than what you show, honestly. And the thing about a picture being worth 1,000 words is, I'm not sure that that's true. But, so I would say sound, if you have $5 to spend the $5 that you have, or spend $6 on the sound, and then come with the dollar you don't have to do the picture. If you have to choose between your children, that's the one to choose. Another one is very important, is frame rate, and I'll indulge myself a little bit on the purely technical side. One of the things that's happening is that everything that we do is now dispersed across an international market. And that's always been true of documentary. Documentary has kind of been a community that spanned cultures and nations and languages and stuff, and that's that in the festival circuit certainly. But one of the things that's happened is that because we now have the equivalent of a film print, a digital equivalent called a DCP, DCPs mostly have to be 24 frames. So that's not universally true, and the SMPTE standard is more open, and I hope and I pray that it will become more open. The Academy also will consider films that are not 24, but until they do, you have to deal with that. And so frame rate is a big thing, and it's a big thing that absolutely has nothing to do with the movie. From the audience's point of view, it's surely a technical thing, and it's a crazy thing to have to spend a lot of time pulling your hair out about, but it's something that we have to do in order to get your film to a place like this. And it's just a practical thing that the projector in there is just designed to show things at 24 frames a second. Dan, do you have one? Do you have a number 4?
No, I would just second to be organized, because it's just gonna save everyone lots of headaches in the end. And even if you are disorganized and you're getting close to the end of your project, you want to probably put some time into becoming organized so you're ready for these guys and you're not pulling your hair out, they're not pulling their hair out.
We're also very willing to come by, into your cutting room stand over your shoulder and look at what you're doing and go, oh, it would be really great if you spent the time, or you and your two best friends spent your time changing all of those, 9-digit numbers to the 12-digit number that actually points to the real file that you're talking about. So you're down here in the middle.
Yeah, kind of along the lines of organization. Do you have kind of like a list of best practices of how to organize things really specifically? I mean, you don't have to go through them all now, but is that something that filmmakers ever reach out to you in search of, and you have a resource for?
Yes. And it's pretty basic too. Like layer 1's going to be your camera original, layer 2 archival, layer 3 graphics. And if you have your own language for it, like we're totally open, but it's that sort of simple situation. And then hey, all the files for layer 1, it's in this folder. All the files for layer 2, they're in this folder. And if you said, when we cross-checked and made sure that that's right, like then there will be tears of joy, silent tears of joy. But that's the whole beginning.
Yeah, any changes in frame rate, for instance, it's good to hold those out. Another layer, all this stuff. That's PAL, if that goes to layer 5 or something, that's really good too. Just being explicit and in documenting what you did, have an idea, because what happens is, again, over these 11-year periods, and this, the most heartbreaking thing in the world is to have somebody come on and say, look, I'm making this film about my dad, okay, or about my sister who I lost, or something like that. And a lot of the most important things that we do are films that are based on someone's life story. And they come to you and they say, I didn't even know I was making a film when I started to do this. This is my family's home movie footage. There's no shame in having that stuff not be like clinically organized by a good assistant editor. It's your stuff. And even in just the hodgepodge ways that sometimes you decide that your film about Roger Stone really becomes the next film about Paul Manafort, God forbid. That you wind up, I thought this was all this, but it winds up being that. Just say, okay, let's take a break now and stop the process of going forward, and start to put those things into an organized kind of, start to think about it as if you're giving it to somebody else. And one of the best ways to rehearse that is to have somebody come down and look at it and say, yeah, it would really be great to know what these two things are. And also when you're organizing things, you find out, it's like cleaning your house, you find things you didn't know you had, which is great. And the other things you find out that something that you really need, is not there, God forbid. And it's good to know that early. Down here?
Budget question?
Sure.
Because talks of limited budgets and post and finishing is like a really expensive end of things, and so how do you guys kind of work with that? Do people come to you with what they have to work with for finishing, or do you guys assess the project and say what it's going to look like to you, or is it kind of a living thing that as you're going?
Yeah, so the question is about how do we react to constraints on a budget, and is it something that I'm paraphrasing, but we don't think of a nonfiction film as having a budget. We don't think, oh, okay, number 3, they just want a number 3 with extra sauce kind of thing. We do kind of know where you are when you bring us your film, and we kind of sense who you're delivering to. That actually has a lot to do with it. If you're delivering to HBO, who's a beloved client of ours, the HBO has certain kind of standards that they expect us to meet for you, whether you meet them or not. And post-production is kind of funny business, and you say it's expensive, and I wish it was more expensive because I have 2 kids, but sadly, it's kind of as expensive as it needs to be sometimes. And I'm not saying, of course I'm saying that because I have a C in front of my title, so I'm responsible for the profitability of my company. But I'm also, and Ben is too. So we feel that. And so honestly, we don't look at it as, particularly with nonfiction, we don't look at it as like, oh, here's somebody, how hard can we squeeze the lemon? And it's more that you have a certain promise that you've made to the broadcaster or to the festival that you're delivering to, and they have certain standards that they have to meet. And you're bringing us the source material that you have. And we try to do the most efficient thing we can to get from point A to point B. Sometimes what we do, and this happens a lot, is, and somebody like Dan would be a good candidate for something like this, is to say, look, do as much as you can yourself, and let's help you do that. So you can conform yourself, which is, to some degree, conforming is an old kind of way of looking at things back from the film days, but in some ways it's still something that we need to do, and especially when you're regulating frame rates and putting a lot of different parts together and trying to make them all play together. But that's, quite often you can do a lot of stuff that is expensive for us to do, and you don't really need us for, like lower thirds and things like that, doing subtitling. Sometimes we can just give the whole thing back to you. You can come in and color correct with one of our artists, and you can come in and mix with one of our people, bring your stuff back, and you can do additional work on top of that will help you do in such a way that you don't break it. Because the computing power for the final product sometimes is not that, you don't have to go crazy having render farms and things like that to do that. Some of what we do requires that. So we try to minimize that as much as possible. Having time helps a lot. So if you say, look, I'm doing this on the hopes that I'll get into Doc NYC, and I think I maybe can do that. I'm putting this together, but I have 6 months. That's great. We'll hear in a week or two of all the Sundance films that are coming to us, and we'll get 15 films. But we don't know which of the 60 films that are currently holding time with us that's going to be. And the problem is we have to then, you can imagine what that's like, try to figure out how we're going to get the right person to work on the right one of these things. And we all have this, and we have 2 months to do everything. And that makes it very hard. It's really great to come to us, and I'm thinking of going to Sundance next year. Can you help me finish my film? And I have $9 to do it. And that's a lot easier than to say, I just got into Sundance, here's all my stuff. And I say that, I'm the guy who did that. I was a producer, and I'm the person who said, it's got, yeah, I mean this Monday. And that, so we say that with all humility. We understand that being in that situation. But we also, and literally we try to do every scale of film. And there's some stuff probably it makes sense to do yourself. If you really don't have any money, we don't want to take money that you don't have. And that's not an ethical thing, it's also a practical thing. We're not, that's not, it is ethical, but it's not, I'm going on about this too much. If you work with post people, they, generally speaking, their most precious commodity is time. So being sensitive to that in the discussion is the biggest thing.
I could tell you a few things me and my team did to kind of shave off some of the costs from what Ben and his team were doing. They can do anything for you basically, but they're going to be a little more expensive than my freelance graphics guy to just do all the still moves. What we ultimately did was we did an in-house conform to deliver to their kind of conform online. The terminology gets really weird, but we onlined all the film to full res and then delivered it to them. They totally offer that service, but it was going to put thousands of dollars and dozens more hours of what we had to pay them. But with that being said, it's just you just have conversations with them, and they're going to work with you what your budget is and what you can and can't do, and might even advise well, we shouldn't do the photo moves if you're trying to keep your costs down. Hire freelance graphics guy, or you could do it in Avid and export it, then you're just delivering it to them as a QuickTime or something like that.
And the other thing to add is, on our end, there's talent development. So, if we can manage your expectations of what you're getting out of a process, then we have a junior night crew that we're trying to get trained up. So you have really hungry people that are really wanting to make relationships in the industry. They have a passion for color, they have a passion for effects, whatever it is. If you have time and patience to work with people who don't have that much experience, we're always trying to make that match. And I think that's a really good introduction for first-time filmmakers with, in a way, first-time colorists. But you can get a lot done, and if you have that luxury of schedule, it's something that these juniors, they're going to be getting advice from the top people in the facility. So it's more than just this one person alone. You know, it's the whole university of the facility. There's a lot of collective knowledge that then gets applied to your project. And that's where we look to. To me, it's a deal. To you, it's a deal. To everybody, it's a great way for a film to get made, for people to develop their careers, and at the end of the day, have a great looking film.
Sorry, do you have a follow-up?
Well, yeah, I do, but it's slightly tougher. I was just gonna say, is there, I know you mentioned that like you get projects that are edited on every kind of program,
Yeah.
like iMovie should have it, but
Literally.
is there, if you haven't picked the editing software yet, is there something that is preferred?
No, no, honestly, I can make a really good argument, and I'm sure these guys can too, for every platform that's currently available. It's, you know, we have a bunch of, as a company, we have a bunch of avids, we have thousands or something. But that's because of the history and the development of our industry and because of the wide range of things that we do. I would say, you know, there are probably only 3 or 4 professional level applications, but the truth is, if you can cut the entire thing in QuickTime Pro. We have people who've done that, and it's even driving me crazy, but you could do that. You could do it in iMovie. We've had a couple of films delivered to us literally in iMovie. If iMovie even exists anymore, I'm not even sure if it does. But every flavor of Final Cut, every flavor of Premiere, Avid is the one that we get a lot of. I would say that if all of them, Avid, which we have a kind of a love-hate relationship with Avid, but going back many years, but it scales the best. You know, it's very hard to throw something at Media Composer that they can't handle, but there's great stuff comes out of everything. The most important thing is to be well organized about the way you approach anything. There was another person over here. Sorry, here in the end.
Yeah, in terms of getting too early, would you even look at something that's in the proposal, if you have a good proposal?
Yeah, I mean, that might be a matter of somebody saying, look, I'm raising money for this show. How much, knowing what I know now about my film, and I'm trying to get this made, can you just take a look at my grant proposal? And we've looked at them, and yeah, absolutely. And
Give a sense of the cost under best circumstances.
yeah, I mean, because again, every film is unique, which is why our business is tricky, because we make a precision product from materials that we can't predict what they are. But to the extent that you do what you say you're going to do, and there's a fringe around that, obviously, because it's reality, and then you put that into the machine, we can predict what your costs are likely to be. And honestly, even if that winds up being 5 years from now, you at least get an idea, you know, where you were in 2017. Even if you wind up finishing a film in 2027, we're getting close to the year 25. Which I'm the only person probably in this room old enough to know why that's funny. Sorry, here in the middle.
Yeah, I direct and I'm a cinematographer, and I've been shooting a wide range of picture profiles on the camera. So some clients want Cinelog, and some I like shooting a lot of wide VR, depending on where my output is. How is and it seems like there's more of a growing trend towards Cinelog as more maybe a response to the 5D saturated looks that you get. How is that? Has that been a better format, or I mean, look for you guys to fix color with, or does it really matter?
Ben, you're a cinematographer. You should take that.
I think for both, Cinelog gives more range. So that said, as long as if you're shooting at like a very low codec, if it was H.264, that might be an issue. Because when you go to linearize it, that's where I've seen it. That's why the 5D really, you get lightweight because it's linearized. The second you try to push it in any direction, it just breaks apart. It's pretty much what you see is what you get. But if you're shooting and you're in log mode, like it's great for us. I mean, that's where we get to have some fun as colorists. That's where great. Like it's not linear. Let's go to town with this.
Are you seeing though? I'm finding that I'll be sending this material in, and I'm seeing that they're not really adjusting. They get really attached to a very flat look. And is that becoming a trend, or am I imagining that?
Well, there's a bunch of things going on there. There's a kind of a tendency to make all films look the same, and we're working with Vittorio Storaro a lot in the last few years, and Vittorio has this thing that people seem to be afraid of red, red, green, and blue.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be kind of muted, and some of that is in service of the film look, which ironically is like slipping out of our fingers, and we're also going crazy trying to revive it, and, I mean really crazy. And it's, some of the nice things about film, where Ben was talking about, is that, log is, it's a technical thing, but the log responds like your eye responds, and it's how film responded, and film failed gracefully. And a lot of electronic media does not. So even though we're in this great time for shooting and doing post and visual effects and everything else that we have to do, because computing is more powerful and it's more pervasive, the problem is we have a medium that it's very, very easy to fuck things up, to be honest. And so film, you could kind of turn a film camera on and kind of roughly expose it and kind of take your hands off, and you kind of were going to be okay. It might not look amazing, but you could usually get something. When you're shooting electronically, you see what you're getting, but you're also, that may not be exactly what you're looking for, is you're like somebody's confessing in front of you. You're not going, oh, I want to turn on the zebra pattern now to make sure that that's not clipping above his eyebrow. And it's that, so I know that's not always the thing you can do, and you're a cinematographer, also a filmmaker. You have to be two people at the same time. A lot of our filmmakers, a lot of our clients are in that situation. They're editing and directing, or they're writing and editing the show, and that winds up, you pull yourself in two directions. So doing something like shooting in log gives you the freedom sometimes to fuck up, to be honest, and to fuck up in such a way that you might be able to recover it a little bit more easily. The trends about the way things look, I can't speak to because I would be killed, but there is a kind of a seriousness button that you press when you're trying to correct, when you're grading something, so that it looks like a serious film. And I would suggest that you think about not hitting the button.
I wanted to, Dan here, I think, I doubt you get asked this much, but when you work in log and dealing with all those formats, the one pitfall, and you spoke to that, is they get used to it, but also applying LUTs and knowing what you shot, the quality of it. I'd love to hear Dan's, your process with that and what you've been through, any war stories.
Well, as an editor, log drives me crazy, especially if it's, multiple cameras, because then you're dealing with multiple LUTs, and that's another thing you have to keep track of when you're delivering to post. I ultimately see the value in them. I could see, especially when it's up on the big screen, what the colorist could do when it's in log. There's definitely so much more latitude, so there's no reason to not shoot log, even if you have a pain in the ass editor who is driven crazy by them. But my suggestion, and I think you probably know this already, but if you're working with clients and you're a cinematographer, have a monitor, make sure that monitor can apply LUTs, and make sure the director and the producers are seeing that log image with the LUT on it, and that the editor's using that same exact LUT. Because I've got into things a few times where, there's the standard LUT, but from the manufacturer, but that's not the LUT that's in the Avid, and it looks different. So as long as you're coordinating and you know that they have the right LUT and you have the right LUT on your monitor, and you could adjust from there.
From a cinematographer standpoint, that covers you too, because the worst thing is you have it look one way on set, and then they're like, whoa, you're not there anymore, and they're seeing it in an offline system. They're like, this doesn't look anything like what I saw, what happened? So that type of coordination is great from everybody's point of view, but it's one step. I've seen sometimes where a LUT's not applied, and the image is broken, but in a way that nobody's noticed, because they've only seen it flat and washed out. So that's why, I second Dan that, seeing it on set with a LUT applied, it's a huge deal. aesthetically and maintaining that aesthetically, but also from a QC standpoint and knowing that, you know, somebody needs to be seeing this the way it's eventually going to look, you know, pretty much, just to know that, hey, the highlights are there or not there. You know, it's a big deal to see that.
You have another question?
Yeah. Are there things that you can do that most filmmakers would be surprised to learn? Are there, you know, beyond the basic, you know, color correction or whatever, are there things that you're most proud of that you've managed to accomplish with people's projects and that we might want to know about?
From my point of view, stabilizing, subtle stabilizing.
Oh, yeah.
I think it can really help. That once people see that, you know, but this is for anybody that's editing in Premiere. Premiere has a pretty great stabilizer too. So if you're stabilizing in Premiere, that might actually be the best version. There have been times where we don't get anything. We'll get something that we think is better, or we think, no, not quite. So Premiere's been like, to me, you can stabilize in that program and get to the same level where we're just making aesthetic choices. It's not about which one looks better or worse. It's just which one do you prefer. Then there's like the little things, compositing. So we might need to take the exit sign out, you know, and if you had a shot that's pretty locked off, or these days, if you just Google Mocha, or any of these programs have pretty advanced trackers that you don't need much training to use. So I've seen people, like, you can hire an intern these days in college that has an interest in post. You're gonna get some pretty good effects done. And then when you come to a facility, that's something where these guys do it every day, and then it becomes in the same way that you might rotoscope. These guys are going to be layering in textures, grain, other ways that, you know, really to hide that it's any sort of effect. But that's a second thing that is a good addition.
I think we're sort of running out of time. Is there any last thing, anybody? Here, sir, and then.
You were touching upon it a little bit. Do you have any specific advice for mobile footage, and what are the challenges, and what do you usually do?
And I'm sorry, the question is about mobile footage,
Yes,
and
yes, from
like from a cell phone.
Assuming it's a high resolution footage, but from a mobile device.
Well, the biggest problem from small formats is depth of field, because because of the way that photography works. The smaller the image area, the larger the greater the depth of field on the image. So it goes to Ben's issue about stabilization. They're related. You know, you can get a fairly when you have shallow depth of field and you're focused on the subject, things can move in front of and in back of the subject without being disturbing. When you use a small format camera, and a cell phone by definition is one, the depth of field is pretty great. And so what happens is when you move the camera, the whole world moves with the camera, and you see everything in focus, and you get a lot of judder. There's nothing we can do about judder, or very little we can do about judder. We can stabilize it, and the stabilization helps that because you are less aware of sometimes that kind of phenomenon. But it's one of the reasons why if, you know, almost anything looks great in daylight if you don't move the camera. Subject can move, but if you just lock the camera off, which is hard to do sometimes with a cell phone, but that'll help that. And if you have to do a candid interview and grab something and put it, even those little rubbery, silly-looking tripods that you can stick that look like a Tinker toy that you can stick on the table and shoot, is really, really worth it. And the reason is the large depth of field, which is not your friend.
And you'll lose a lot of times think about it like 5D, like you won't be able to push the image as much. It's more linearized, what you see is what you get. And it's that jello thing, it's going away. The cameras in cell phones have gotten better, but a good for instance would be if you had a monopod and you were doing an interview, but let's say next door it's the Titanic and it's the scene with tons of vibration. It might be really subtle, and you won't see it on the phone when you hit play, but the second you download it and look at it on a bigger screen, you'll see a little of that jello, which we can't do anything about. But I think cameras have gotten a lot better that way, but just things to keep in mind.
Thank you very much. I don't think we're running away, so if people, you want to grab one of us as we're working out.
We can take one more really quick question.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 more minutes.
Anybody?
So something real straightforward.
Here in the middle?
As a first-time filmmaker whose skill set is nowhere near anything that you guys do, and my plan is to kind of, when I head into post-production, hopefully in another month or so, hand everything I got over to someone who will do everything that you said without my doing any of it.
Mm-hmm.
What would the expectations be for, working with a post-production company, and, where's the involvement level? Do I, move into offices for a couple of months, or what's the way to best manage that relationship?
Well, in a way, I'd stated, speaking to what Dan was saying, I think if you're not working with a good assistant editor, getting a freelance assistant to come check out the project, or talking to us about seeing, getting some snapshots of just what the organization is. It's about, you can get a pro in that's a freelancer, a top-notch assist, and they can kind of set up a path for getting it organized. Once it comes to us, it's as involved as you want it to be. A lot of times, we just deal with it, send a couple of emails, and then at this point, we have a reference and we have the project, and we're just going to be asking where files are. But the more that happens in advance, the better.
We've been talking in general about post-production at the end of the post-production process, but we also offer cutting rooms, and cutting crews come into our place, and we have lots and lots and lots of cutting rooms to come into, and we as the Postworks side of the family does that stuff all the time. But that's the thing we don't do is we don't have editors, we don't have story editors who are sitting and cutting the film with you, and that's something that you would have to find and bring in and stuff, but we can help you find people.
Okay, and with that note, thank you so much. Thank you, Joe, Daniel, Ben, thank you so much. Thank you, Technicolor Postworks New York.